So that song, of course, is Liverpool's hymn, as it were. My parents are from Liverpool, and I owe a huge debt to them. So there they are, and this is my father. This is my father in his cricket team in 1931. And, excuse me, I get emotional. Those are two very brave people. They came to Africa at the end of the Second World War because they thought there were more opportunities in Africa, and they were correct. Neither of them ever went to university. I could go to university, and everything I've achieved was based on their decision to leave Liverpool and come to South Africa. So I'm going to talk about hope in your heart and belief systems. And I'm going to begin my story because I was originally a runner with this fabulous story of this man who did not fight in the Second World War. So he's also part of the great generation. The great generation was the people who fought in the Second World War like my father. He didn't fight, neither of these people fought in the Second World War, and they both wanted to leave a legacy. On the left is Roger Bannister, on the right is John Landy. And when they raced many years ago, they wanted to break the 4-minute mile, and that was the world record. And these were the two athletes who would do it. And on the left was Bannister, who achieved it. And if you go back and look at the world records for the mile, you'll see that the world record came down from about 4:08 down to 4:01 at the end of the Second World War. These were Swedish runners. They were not fighting in the war, so they had time to train. And anyway, during that time, John Landy ran the mile 7 times in 4 minutes and 2 seconds, 7 times. And he said, frankly, I think the 4-minute mile is beyond my capabilities. 2 seconds may not sound much, but to me it's like trying to break through a brick wall. Someone may achieve the 4-minute mile the world is wanting so desperately, and that you can never achieve anything if that's your belief, because your subconscious controller in your brain will tell you 4:02 is good enough. So Bannister then broke the world record, and this 46 days later, John Landy ran 4 seconds faster than he'd ever run in his life before. And one of the key reasons for the difference was that Bannister had a coach, and Landy didn't. And the coach believed in Bannister, and that was key. So Bannister speaks 50 years later about what happened on the day of the race. He arrived at the race field, the track, and it was miserable, rainy, wet, etc. And he said, I'm not racing today. And his coach called him in and said the following to him.
The crucial thing that he said was, well, I think you can run a 3:56 mile. If he believed that, I hope he did. It certainly was a helpful comment. And he said, if you have the chance and you don't take it, you may regret it for the rest of your life.
So Bannister's coach said to him, you can run a 3:56 mile in good conditions, and these conditions you can run a 3:59. 50 years later, he still doesn't know whether his coach actually believed, but that wasn't enough. It wasn't important because he achieved it. Here is his coach, and his coach says training is principally an act of faith. You have to believe that through training you'll become fitter and healthier, and so on. And we don't talk about that. We talk about changing your physiology. The reality is training changes your brain perceptions of what you can achieve. And he also said, Stamford also said, the great hurdle was the mental barrier. So if I ask this audience, I can train you, all of you, to run the Comrades next year, some of you will immediately say it's impossible, I can't do it. Others will say, when do we start? And that's the difference, because we put up this mental barrier, and you have to get over the mental barrier first to be successful. So here's Bannister again speaking. I shall always regard the crux of my coach's contribution that on the day of the race he gave me the self-belief that despite the bad weather I could break the 4-minute mile. And I believed him. That's what coaches are there for, to make you believe. Here's the next great runner, Herb Elliott, and he said to run a world record you have to have the absolute arrogance to think you can run a mile faster than anyone who's ever lived, and then you have to have the absolute humility to actually do it. And in South African terms, Wade van Niekerk is the athlete who epitomizes the humility and the arrogance, because he set a world record in one of the most difficult disciplines, the 400 meters, in the Olympic Games. and he is incredibly humble. But that hides a discipline and an arrogance that you have to have. You can't have too much of either or you won't succeed. The next great runner who really inspired me was a guy called Jim Ryan. And this is a picture of him as a 17-year-old breaking the 4-minute mile, becoming the first athlete in history to break the 4-minute mile. He'd only started running 4 years before. He's never run. He was completely useless at everything. And when he was 15, his coach called him in and said the following to him: "Let's talk about goals." He said, "What do you think you can do a mile in?" And he says, "Yes, this year I don't know, maybe." And the coach says, "Not this year, I mean by the time you're a senior, i.e. in 2 years' time." And Ryan says, "I'd never given it any thought, maybe I can run 4:10. And the coach says, "I'm talking about the 4-minute mile, Jim. No high school boys ever run one. I think you can be the first. I'm convinced you can do it." And what does he say? "Coach, I think you're crazy." So what happens? 2 years later, he breaks the 4-minute mile. And this is the point, that we have to set the goals, because most people don't have the goal. They don't understand their ability. At the time, I had no idea what a 4-minute mile signified. I was only 15 years old, basically still a child. He was certain about my ability, even if I wasn't myself. He'd already tutored several very successful milers and believed in his coaching system. As difficult as it was to make the adjustment to consider myself a champion, a front runner, as a good athlete, I did my best to trust in the coach's judgment and to believe his words. Though I was initially dumbfounded by his prediction, it did in fact prove not only to be accurate, but to set me on target for what would be the essence of my life for some years to come. And he concluded by saying that I was willing to go along with his much higher goals than Ryan had thought possible. This is the greatest athlete of all time. He said, "I'm the greatest." I said that even before I knew I was, which of course shows the humor that he understood that it was a strange statement. We've heard about American football. We had that lovely The Inches speech, and American football is a game of inches, and it's the most complex sport in the world. And the athletes who participate are the best athletes, in my opinion, in any sport in the world. And this is one of the great ones. Winners imagine their dreams first. They want it with all their heart and expect it to come true. There's no other way to live. This guy is not only a supreme athlete physically, but he's an astonishing mental athlete as well. He has his coach, and this is the key, that you can't have a great athlete without an exceptional coach. And this is what his coach said: "Joe Montana came to the San Francisco 49ers believing he was extraordinary. My job to is convince him that he was beyond extraordinary." And how many times are we challenged to be beyond extraordinary? Very seldom. Mostly we're told the opposite. There's one very famous moment in his career. I'm just going to show you that moment, not just for what happened, but for the fact of their belief systems. And so this was a very famous game. It was the semi-finals, as it were, for the Championships of America. And Joe Montana, it was all down to him. He had one play to succeed. And this is how it is remembered.
There wasn't a doubt in our mind that we were going to score on Dallas. They knew that they couldn't stop us. You only had to look across the line of scrimmage to know that. We had Joe.
Who is this guy, Montana? I'm John Wayne. I'm John Wayne. And John Wayne never loses.
So this is what happened.
As a 49er fan growing up, you're thinking, just get rid of the ball. Just give us one more play. He releases the ball, and it's just, oh, thank you. We have one more chance. And then a blur. Shouldn't be there. Down comes Dwight Clark, and football changed forever.
There's all sorts of myths surrounding that stuff, you know. Did Dwight know that pass was going there? Was he throwing it away?
No matter what anybody says, if you talk to all the Cowboy players, they will tell you he was throwing that ball away.
If you don't get what you want, simply throw the ball away.
It sure looked from the sideline like he was just getting rid of the ball, because they were coming.
Sorry, Dallas Cowboy fans, he wasn't throwing the ball away.
He was throwing the ball where only Dwight was going to go up and get it.
Montana finally throwing all the way. Clark makes a leaping catch. No, they practiced the play, they'll tell you.
We had practiced this play so many times, and I knew exactly what Joe was trying to do. When we practiced it, Joe would always throw it either too low or, way over my head. But in the game that sends you to the Super Bowl, he puts it in the exact spot where it has to be.
You know what? It doesn't matter. All that matters is that Dwight Clark was in that moment, at that place, and made that catch.
There are so many great Joe Montana moments to choose from. The catch is number one. The catch will always be number one.
That's what sport's all about, those moments of perfection that you spend your life building on and believing it's possible. When I started running, Nike running shoes didn't exist. One man had a vision that he wanted to produce the best running shoes in the world, even before it even had the first shoe, and that's Phil Knight. He signed up 2 people early on, the athlete on the right, Steve Prefontaine, and Jeff Hollister on the left. Jeff Hollister was the first employee of Nike. He's my age, exactly my age. And he sold Nike shoes out of the back of his car. He has colon cancer and wrote his autobiography, and he wrote some of the best finished to a book I've ever read. And he said the following: I thought often of what it all means. Life thrusts you into a competitive environment. How do you prepare for the realities and the unknown? Hopefully you have a mentor. And he was an athlete coached by this guy Bowerman. A time when someone has a belief in your future more than you do, and that's the key to coaching. You have to have more belief in the athlete than the athlete believes in himself or herself. It's not about how long you live, but how you contribute. It's about doing your best and doing the right thing. It's about recovering from your mistakes and not giving up. It's about the baton pass to a new generation. It's about the realization you cannot go alone. It takes a team. Even an individual, as Gary was speaking, he's an individual sport, but there's a team involved. In the end, we are somewhere in the middle, part of a never-ending process. The future will never remember what was in your bank account or what kind of car you drove. The future will remember that wild ride of life where you believed in others and left a gift behind for someone else to dream the impossible. The gift was your own life. The gift was your own life. It does not matter whether it was long or short. What did you leave behind? And what we have to leave behind is the coaching of people to believe in themselves. That's one of the great messages I've learned in my life. I was fortunate to be consultant to the Springbok rugby team that won the 2007 Rugby World Cup, and I learned a great deal from that because they were an astonishing team. And their coach was an astonishing coach as well, Jake White. And this is what he wrote in his book, and I never understood it until I asked him, how did he know this at such a young age? As a 17-year-old, he wrote, what are my dreams for the future? My greatest dream is to play rugby, especially for the Springboks, but even to become their coach. I've seen how you can make people believe in themselves, how you can show people that every single person can be a winner if you want it. And I asked Jake, how at the age of 17 did you know that? He said it was simple. I was the hooker for the Jeppe High School team. And once a month or so, the coach would come down and say on a Monday, gosh, you know, so-and-so, you really played well on Saturday. I think you've got a future in this game. You could play provincial rugby or you could become a Springbok. And Jake said that guy the next week, he would start playing as if he was already a Springbok. But Jake said, unfortunately, the coach never said that to me, so he had to become the coach rather than the player. When he first met the team, they just won the World Cup in under-21, and he said, you've just won the under-21 Rugby World Cup, you will win the 2007 Rugby World Cup. And the players said, it's impossible, Jake. He said, no, you've just beaten them, you're going to be playing them again in 4 years' time, why not? And he stuck with that belief, and he worked on it for 4 years. And in the end, the players achieved what the coach said they would on the first day he coached them. It's a classic example of belief in the athletes. The other person I was fortunate to work with was Lewis Pugh. And Lewis, as you know, from Cape Town, a lawyer from UCT, cold water swimmer, who's become one of the world's leading environmentalists. And he wanted to swim 1 kilometer at the North Pole in a Speedo and return alive. And my job was to make sure he returned alive. So it all began, he phoned me or came to my office one day and he said, can I swim around the Cape Peninsula? Because he'd spoken to everyone else in Cape Town and they said, no. And I said, well, I understand the physiology. Yes, you can do it. So he went out and did it. It took him 13 days, and he got back. And when he arrived back on Muizenberg Beach, he phoned me at my offices in Newlands, and he said, Coach, I couldn't have done it without you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you believed in me. I just needed one person to believe in me. And he said there was a moment when he was swimming off Hot Bay where he had to ask the question, do I continue or don't I? And he said, there's one person who believes you can do it, so let's go and do it. The next he asked me, can I swim at 80 degrees north of the island of Svalbard? And I said, what's the expected water temperature? And he said, 0 to 5 degrees centigrade. So I said, I can't guarantee you'll live. So anyway, we went and did some experiments and proved that it could, and he managed to achieve that. We went down the Antarctic, and he did a swim for a mile in the water temperature of 2 to 3 degrees. This was a classic swim, and you can see he was pretty tired and very, very cold. His muscles were at a temperature of 31 degrees centigrade. The normal's 38. 37. They stayed 31 for 3 hours after his swim, despite the fact that we warmed him. He was just an ice block when we pulled him out. We then went from Murmansk in Russia to the North Pole. So we took the boat trip to the North Pole. It took 7 days. It's now 3 days because the ice has disappeared so much. And then we came back. And at the North Pole, he swam 1 kilometer in about 18 minutes. And the key to the success of the project, we had absolute trust in each other's abilities. He knew that I would not allow him to swim into trouble and damage himself, and I knew that he would keep swimming as long as I gave him the message that he could continue. So my final example is one I'm really proud of, was working with this rugby team from the University of Cape Town, because everything is stacked against us. We don't have the money to get the best athletes, and we're academic, and so they're pretty academic students that we have. And a few years ago, in 2014, we won this competition 39-33. But the problem was that 7 minutes before the game, we were finished, we were completely out of the game. We were 18 points down, and the game was over, essentially, and the other side must have assumed they were going to win. And so if we take you back to the game, at 74 minutes, we were 18 points down. So we have to score 18 points in 7 minutes, and we've only scored 15 in 74 minutes. So what hope have we? So what happened at this moment was, just before this moment, 2 of our players had been injured. One with concussion, the captain had been taken off, and the other player had hurt his neck, and he had been stretchered off. So there was a 5-minute period in which this player, number 10, Dean Grant, who had played an atrocious game on that day, but was our key player of the whole season. And the coach had said, I will never take him off, never, I don't care how badly he plays, I promise to support this player. And fortunately, he left him on, because at 74 minutes into the game, Dean Grant had a vision. That's all you can say, he had a vision. So he called the players together, and this is what he said to them. Oakes, I can't tell you or explain to you why, but I know that we're going to win this game. Now, that's ridiculous. The game was completely unwinnable. Something has just told me that we're going to win, and it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not, but I promise you a miracle is going to happen now. Boys, you have to believe, but believe with your whole heart that we're going to win here, and I promise you we will. A miracle is going to happen now, but you have to believe. And what had happened at that moment was we put the reserve bench on. The full 7 reserves came on at that time. And so they were on the field, and they didn't conceive that they'd lost the game, because they'd only just come on, and they conceived that they were being put on to win the game. So this is the power of a self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is defined as a false definition of the situation, evoking new behaviors which make the original conception come true. So what happened in the next few minutes was we scored 2 tries, and the game went into overtime, or went to 82 minutes. And then this is the concluding minute or so. We're still 2 points behind. We're deep in our own territory. They should have ended the game. They had an opportunity to end the game. We charged down a drop kick attempt, and this is what happened.
UCG's got position. Sean McDonald. Ready to line up. penalty is only worth 2 points. Cannot win it. A try can. Or take this game to extra time, UCT. Loose ball, tied it up by Alexandra. All happening beyond the gain line. Little step, a little shimmy. Good work from John Davies.
Last feet. Let's go, last feet.
Show and go. Good work from Stewart. Deep got. UCT not giving up. They got numbers on the outside. The Hoosiers rush the line. Looking impressive, a ball in hand. This would be the finish of any rugby I've seen in 2014. Artois, Souls. The show and go, the space opens up. There it goes now. Sullivan back in. Oh! There it goes. Let them know. The biggest comeback of 2014. Wow!
What I didn't have time to tell you was how the team had been prepared for that match, because it was assumed that we would lose. There was nothing, because the team was so much superior, the Poch team. And I gave them a book to read, and it was called The Boys in the Boat. And it's a story about 8 young men who go to Washington University and start rowing as a crew. And after 2 years, this is in 1934, after 2 years, the coach says to them, "You are going to win the Olympic Games gold medal in 1936, even before they've won a major competition." And it's a story of how these guys bond and then go on to win the Olympic gold medal in 2 years later. And one of the key moments is that the night before the final, although they're the best team, they win the semi-finals and they're given the worst draw, because it's organized by the Germans and they decide we don't want the Americans winning this gold medal. So they put them in the worst lane with lots of wind, etc. But worst of all, the stroke, who's the most important oarsman, is so sick that the coach says we can't row him tomorrow. The team says we row with him or we don't row at all. They take off and he's in terrible shape. And with 500 meters to go, the crew is way down. It's like a length down. Over the last 400 meters, they close in and they win by 6 inches. And they describe how that was what they finally came together as a unit. And that was what they were going to take away from it. And we said to this team, go out and do something special that will be remembered for the rest of your lives. Because that's what sport gives you, this opportunity to do that. And so my final statement is from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a former president of the United States, remembered as one of the people who really changed the future of the United States. And he said, men or women are not prisoners of fate, but only prisoners of their own minds. And I hope that my talk will show you that if you believe in an outcome, it's much more probable that you'll achieve that outcome. Thank you very much.